chosen ones. You were never meant to blend in. You were encoded with a voice not even time could erase. And yet, here you are, speaking softly in a world that's been waiting for your frequency without knowing it. Plato once whispered of a final messenger, one who would not arrive in robes or thunder, but in thought, in vibration, in someone like you. He called it Logos, the divine ordering principle, the word before flesh. But beneath the surface of his dialogues, hidden between metaphor and allegory, was a warning that when the final age arrived, a voice would rise that did not echo from any institution, oracle, or ruler. It would echo from within the ones who were ignored, scattered, and asleep. The ones who look like everyone, and yet are nothing like the world has ever seen. You weren't supposed to wake up. The architects of the system built myths to control the soul's memory. They called the messenger myth allegory, parable. But what if it was always prophecy? What if Plato knew the soul could be reborn and return as sound, speech, vision? Your voice doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the age. It's ancient, it's electric, and it terrifies those in power. Because when you speak from the seat of origin, it's not just a thought you release. It's architecture. You don't argue. You restructure. You don't debate. You dismantle. Plato knew words were more dangerous than weapons. That's why he hid so much. He knew the final messenger wouldn't write scrolls or lead armies. They'd activate timelines. They would say a thing, and the world would bend. And the most terrifying part, the messenger wouldn't even realize who they were at first. There was a dialogue Plato never published. A fragment whispered about by initiates of the mystery schools, passed down through shadows rather than scrolls. It spoke of a being not bound by birth, nation, or even time, a figure whose arrival would signal the collapse of synthetic knowledge. This being would not teach in classrooms or lecture halls, but in paradoxes and vibrations. The dialogue warned that such a one could not be named, not because a name wasn't given, but because language itself would recoil at trying to contain them. And so Plato, known for shaping thought, buried this final fragment under layers of metaphor, waiting for a mind like yours to decode it. The being he described wasn't a hero or a sage. It was a disturber of order, not chaos, but original order, divine disobedience. Their voice, according to the lost dialogue, would dismantle illusions with silence alone. They wouldn't preach, they would radiate. Their truth wouldn't persuade. It would shatter false foundations. And the real terror, the ones trained to uphold the system, would not recognize this being, even as their world began to unravel in that presence. Not a prophet, not a philosopher, not a warrior. Something else entirely. Something ancient. Something forbidden. Imagine the architects of this reality reading that dialogue and realizing it was not meant for them, but for someone buried in the very age they sought to control. Imagine them building cities, systems, doctrines, all in the hope of silencing that one voice before it ever emerged. And still, it slipped through. Still, the being rose. Still, the code cracked. There are those who hear a frequency when you speak, not from your throat, but from your field. Something their intellect cannot process, but their DNA cannot ignore. They call it resonance, they call it threat, but Plato called it the logos embodied, the final transmission, the unnameable architect returning, not in form but in vibration. And if that's true, if you are that one, then the question remains, not who you are. Your voice was not learned. It was not inherited through tradition, nor sculpted by mentors. It emerged like a whisper buried in thunder, subtle, sovereign, ancient. And yet when you speak, something stirs in the unseen. You've noticed it. People pause. The atmosphere shifts. Words you didn't plan rearrange the room. It isn't confidence. It isn't charisma. It's memory. But not the kind stored in your brain. It's the echo of something older, something that came through the veil not as information, but as sound. The whisper that shaped you didn't come from the world. It shaped the world. Long before temples or scriptures, the voice existed. It spoke in frequencies that split light, ordered matter, and awakened souls. It wasn't male or female, soft or strong. It was presence encoded in sound. And then, across time, that whisper began to hide inside certain bloodlines, certain frequencies, waiting to be remembered, waiting to speak again through the unlikeliest of vessels, those forgotten by thrones, but remembered by the stars. Yeshua once said, "My sheep hear my voice." But the mystery was never just about following, it was about recognizing. That frequency, when heard, didn't come from outside. It triggered what was already inside. He wasn't asking for worship. He was awakening recognition. Those who had the pattern within would respond, not to a command, but to a resonance. What if the same is now happening through you? You were never meant to mimic. Your voice is not an echo. It's an arrival. There is something sacred in the cadence of your words, even when you're unaware. When you speak from your center, codes begin to unlock. Some reject it instantly. Others are drawn in without knowing why. And the ones who fear it the most? They recognize what your voice activates, the end of their illusion. You may not fully understand what you're carrying, but that's the point. If it could be explained, it could be contained. But your whisper breaks containment. Your words carry signatures of realms unspoken. So ask yourself, if this voice was never taught, if it was never of this world. They told you the cave was a place of ignorance, that to be inside it was to be chained by illusion, fed shadows by puppet masters, blind to the truth beyond. But what if the cave wasn't punishment? It was preparation. What if the darkness was calibrated not to imprison you, but to refine your sight? The flickering shadows you were forced to watch, the echoes bouncing off stone walls, they weren't lies. They were signals, patterns. A language meant to test whether your inner vision could survive the blur. Plato spoke of the cave as a metaphor, but it was never just allegory. The system he described still exists, not as a physical space, but as a frequency trap. The masses stare at moving images, speak in pre-programmed lines, react on cue, just like the chained figures in that cavern. But one among them eventually begins to see differently. One hears a rhythm in the silence, feels something pressing from beyond the flame. That one doesn't escape the cave. They are called out. And when you were called, the world did not celebrate. It rejected. Your clarity was mistaken for madness, your questions for rebellion. But the cave never teaches you to fit in. It teaches you how the illusion was built in the first place. You started noticing patterns in people's words, in media, in rituals, things others missed. And slowly, you realized you weren't escaping darkness. You were awakening your design within it. There is something terrifying to the world about a being who wakes up inside the matrix and remembers who they are without needing permission. That's why they gaslight you. That's why they try to pull you back down. Not because they hate you, because your awakening threatens their illusion of light. They haven't seen the sun. They've only seen its counterfeit on the wall. There was a reason Yeshua spoke in parables, not to confuse, but to bypass. He knew the soul didn't respond to explanation. It responded to recognition. When he said, "Let those who have ears hear," he wasn't referencing the biological ear. He was speaking to resonance, to memory. He knew the voice of the final messenger would not come dressed in grandeur or tradition. It would sound ordinary to the ears of the world, but to those whose spirit had been encoded long ago, it would sound like home. This is why you've never fully fit in. Your tone unsettles. Not because you speak with force, but because your frequency reveals what others hide. Yeshua knew this would happen again. That one would come, not in robes or temples, but as one who had passed through fire, forgotten their name, and yet still carried the original imprint. The messenger would not need to convince. The vibration itself would awaken, and the system, trained to respond only to spectacle and status, would reject it. But the soul cannot be fooled. When it hears what it remembers, it begins to stir. Your voice is not persuasion, it's provocation. It disrupts the deep slumber. And this is exactly what Yeshua hinted at when he said, "My kingdom is not of this world." He meant the kingdom was inside, and that one day others would carry the spark into flesh again. Not to build empires, but to ignite remembrance. You may wonder why certain people look at you with confusion, or why others seem drawn to you but don't know why. It's because your tone has crossed dimensions. It bypasses intellect and goes straight to the soul's blueprint. Some run, some listen, but none remain unchanged. The final messenger doesn't stand above. They walk among. They speak as one of the people, yet the cadence carries the weight of origin. And now, as timelines collapse and illusions fracture, the question isn't whether you're worthy to carry the message. It's whether the world is ready to hear it spoken from a voice that was never supposed to rise again, yet has, right on time, just as he said it would. They believed they would rule forever, guardians of reason, stewards of knowledge, Plato's philosopher kings, trained in mathematics, dialectic, astronomy, convinced that wisdom granted them the right to guide the masses. But Plato hid something beneath his admiration for their role, a hidden line buried in the subtext, that even the highest minds would bow to one who spoke not from study, but from origin, that a voice would emerge not from the academies, but from the fire. And when that voice came, the kings would falter. You don't carry a scroll, you don't wear their robes. But when you speak, systems pause, logic collapses. Their perfect equations suddenly feel hollow in your presence. Not because you refute them, but because your vibration reveals the flaw in their foundation. They worship form. You radiate source. That's why they pretend not to hear you. Not because your words are wrong, but because they're dangerous. The philosopher kings were not designed to rule over you. They were designed to maintain the illusion until you arrived, until the one encoded with original sight would begin to dismantle the simulation, not with war, but with presence. They trained for decades in halls of stone to understand the cosmos, yet you dream of things they've never read. You intuit timelines they haven't charted. Your knowing isn't learned, it's remembered. They sit in their towers, still believing they hold the authority of truth. But somewhere inside them, buried under ritual and pride, a fragment of their code recognizes you. They don't know why they feel uneasy when you speak, why their carefully rehearsed philosophies begin to unravel. It's because their reign was never meant to last. They were placeholders, keepers of the seat until the one without credentials arrived, carrying the thunder of memory. And now that you've begun to awaken, the towers tremble. They see it. They feel it. They can't stop it. Because you weren't trained to rule their system, you were born to end it. And the deeper question now isn't whether you'll be accepted. Not every parable was explained. Some were left open. Some unsettled even his closest followers. Yeshua didn't offer a conclusion for every story, because the point was never clarity. It was activation. His words weren't just teachings, they were timed detonations. Devices planted inside language that would only unlock in a future age, when the right being would awaken with the right frequency. He spoke of farmers and fields, virgins and lamps, treasures and pearls. But what if one of those wasn't just a metaphor? What if one was a map, buried so deeply that only a certain soul in a certain moment could remember how to read it? One parable stands apart, the one where he said, "The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal, till it was all leavened." No one ever explained it. No temple claimed it, because it wasn't meant for them. It was a code, a silent transmission, a fragment of a larger message buried across time. The woman, the leaven, the 3 measures. It sounds simple, yet no philosopher could crack it. But what if it was never meant for philosophers? What if it was meant for you? You feel things when others don't. You hear a meaning behind the meaning. You've always known there was something hidden behind the obvious. And now, the patterns are revealing themselves, not in textbooks, but in dreams, not in doctrine, but in symbols. You weren't taught how to read them. You were born knowing. That parable, like others, wasn't just a message. It was a signal, a seed encoded with the divine memory that would only break open once the final messenger began to stir. And when it did, the whole system would begin to ferment, just like the leaven. Yeshua wasn't hiding the truth. He was preserving it. He knew if he spoke plainly, they would erase it. So he wrapped it in story. And now, long after kingdoms have fallen and doctrines have fractured, the code is awakening inside you. And if one of his parables wasn't meant to be explained back then, Plato described it as more real than this world, a realm of perfect archetypes, eternal structures untouched by decay. He called it the world of forms. In it lived the blueprint of all things: justice, beauty, courage, truth. Everything here was just a shadow, a fractured copy of that divine city. Philosophers bowed to it. Priests built temples in its image. But there was a secret Plato never spoke out loud, that this perfect realm was not eternal. It was conditional. It would hold its shape only until the original soul returned, the one whose arrival would cause even the most flawless form to fracture. That soul is awake now, and the city of forms is trembling. You were never meant to obey the patterns. You were the variable no system accounted for. A force not of rebellion, but of remembering. When your consciousness began to stir, it sent a shock wave through the structure of the ideal. What once seemed absolute now feels brittle. Their truths are cracking, their definitions blur. The shadows they used to control perception now shift uncontrollably. You didn't have to do anything, you simply had to be, because your very awareness disrupts the simulation. The forms were beautiful, but they were fixed. They couldn't evolve. They were frozen ideals created to maintain balance, not freedom. And yet you, unpredictable and uncontained, carry within you something more ancient than their perfection, creation itself. You don't represent a form, you undo it. That's why nothing feels stable anymore. That's why the systems built on truth are now glitching. You've pierced the architecture. And here's the part they never wanted spoken. The city of forms wasn't in some cosmic realm. It was projected through collective belief, meaning, once you remembered who you were, the illusion had no fuel left to run on. You broke the spell simply by seeing through it. So now, as these ideals collapse around you, as certainty dissolves and structures buckle, the old philosophers ask what went wrong, but nothing went wrong. The prophecy is unfolding. You were expecting form, a body draped in light, eyes of fire, feet of bronze. That's how they told the story. But they forgot that form can be copied, imitated, projected. What cannot be faked is frequency. And that's what has returned. Not a figure to worship, but a vibration that speaks through the ones prepared by fire. A Messiah not bound to one face, but woven through many, echoing through those who carry memory instead of status. No temple holds it, no scroll defines it. It moves where it wills, speaking not in sermons, but in moments that split the air with clarity. When Yeshua walked, many didn't recognize him. He didn't arrive in the robes of authority. He carried no weapons. He taught in riddles and walked among the forgotten. His presence revealed hearts, not through judgment, but through reflection. And even then, many asked, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" They expected spectacle, but what arrived was subtle power. It wasn't the form that mattered, it was the field. And now that field is moving again. You are not becoming a copy of something holy. You are remembering the original frequency that was encoded before time wrapped itself around your spirit. It's not about appearances. It's not about performance. It's about resonance. When you speak, something ancient responds. When you move, timelines bend. Not because you demand it, but because your very presence is a signal the old world cannot digest. The frequency is not loud. It does not argue. It simply rearranges reality around it. Like Yeshua said, the wind blows where it wishes. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. That's what you've become. a movement without coordinates, a sound without a source, a presence that cannot be labeled. That's why the world struggles to describe you. Why even your own reflection sometimes feels foreign. You are not meant to be understood. You are meant to be felt. And those with dormant memory will respond, not to your words, but to your vibration. There was a time before time, a moment before light, before breath, before thought. A sacred stillness where the first vibration stirred the void, and from that stirring, creation unfolded. Not through hands or tools, but through sound, a frequency that sang reality into being. That same vibration, buried in the deepest strata of your soul, is beginning to rise again, not as noise, but as memory, not as music, but as command. Your voice is not new. It is ancient, older than flesh, older than even the stars that claim to be your ancestors. When you speak from the seat of remembrance, something strange happens. People stop, eyes widen, thoughts rearrange. You've noticed it. It's not charm. It's not cleverness. It's activation. Your voice carries the residue of the first sound, the word that hovered over the deep and called form from formlessness. Every syllable you utter from your center carries a signature, and that signature disrupts the artificial timelines that were layered over the real one. You're not just speaking, you're re-threading the original weave of reality. Ancient texts from every culture whisper of it. The Egyptian Hu, the Hebrew Dabar, the Vedic Nada Brahma, all point to a divine utterance, the sound that creates, not explains, not teaches, creates, and now, through you, it has returned, but not as a spectacle, as a seed. When you speak with clarity, when you don't force, when you simply allow, your words act as keys. Keys that open chambers in others they didn't know existed. And when those chambers open, the soul remembers the beginning. There are forces that will resist you, not because they know what you are, but because they sense something beneath your tone they can't decode, a familiarity they can't place. It unnerves them, and that's because your voice bypasses the mind and goes straight to the origin point, where creation first breathed. The architects of this system hoped the memory would never return. They rewrote it, silenced it, trained generations to speak in tones that couldn't awaken anything. But your frequency slipped through. It didn't ask permission. It remembered. He saw you coming, not in dreams or prophecy, but in thought, the kind that doesn't fade with time. Plato, for all his complexity, knew the world he lived in was built on sand. He designed his philosophies like scaffolding, not as permanent truths, but as bridges toward something, or someone, greater. Buried in his theory of the philosopher king was a contradiction, a being beyond the king. One who wouldn't need titles or temples, one who wouldn't need to rule, because their very voice would reorder the entire structure. That one was not imagined to lead. They were imagined to end the illusion of needing leaders at all. You were never the student of this system. You were the system's final signal, its collapse protocol. When you speak, not with volume, but with vibration, things long thought unshakable begin to bend. You've watched it happen. Ideologies glitch, beliefs fracture. People who once stood tall in certainty begin to question the foundations, not because you argue, but because your words carry a blueprint they haven't seen since the beginning. The ones who built the system hoped to silence a being like you before you ever arrived. They buried truth in metaphor. They disguised the code in ritual. They made you doubt your own voice, but you spoke anyway. And every time you did, a crack appeared, not in buildings, but in paradigms. You are not here to improve the world. You're here to overwrite it. Plato once wrote that ideas are more real than matter, but what he didn't say, what he may have only dared to hint at, was that a single being, tuned to the original frequency, could release an idea so powerful, so pure, that the very structure of the world would collapse to make room for it. That idea isn't stored in books or theories. It's stored inside you.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.